Welcome everyone. We are doing the Battle of Alesia, which is a Gallic battle that we kind of witnessed, but I want to take the full time now to try to just isolate this video. This is where the Gallic Wars essentially ends with the surrender of guy I can't pronounce his name. But anyway, I'm glad you're here. Make sure you hit that like button. Let's go.
Put yourself in this situation. You're the commander of an army. You're up against somebody with superior technology, but you have them slightly outnumbered. You are better supplied, but they are better disciplined. You've defeated them in a minor engagement in the past, but that was in an unusual situation, where you had cut their supply lines and they had acted foolishly. You have allies, but they're very far away, fighting battles of their own. Seriously consider this question. What would you do? This was Vercingetorix's situation
Vercingetorix, that's the name.
In 52 B.C.E. His opponent was Julius Caesar. This was the Battle of Alesia.
Hard opponent.
This is how Vercingetorix responded to this situation. He pulled his men back to a highly defensible hilltop fort. He sent out messengers to all of his allies, asking for reinforcements. His logic was this: if Caesar was foolish enough to attack the fort, Vercingetorix still held the high ground with superior numbers, and would cut him to pieces. If Caesar was foolish enough to wait around, Vercingetorix's reinforcements would arrive, and Caesar would be up against two armies instead of one. You can see that Vercingetorix is trying his best to play into his strengths. Greater numbers? Let's amplify that by calling for reinforcements.
And that's the struggle of the tug-of-war of siege. You either attack or you wait out. You attack or you wait out. It's a sure thing of waiting out, you can do it. But if you don't have reinforcements or you don't have that supply chain, you gotta attack. That's desperation at its finest.
Better supplied? Let's dig in and see if the enemy acts impulsively. So what went wrong? Over the course of his 7-year proconsulship, Caesar had been slowly tightening his grip on Gaul. He hadn't annexed any territory officially, only the Roman Senate could do that, but the Gauls contributed troops to Caesar's armies, supplied him with grain, and even handed over annual tribute. The Roman Senate may not have called it annexation, but it would have felt an awful lot like it to the Gallic people. As Caesar's grip on Gaul tightened, a conspiracy hatched between the regional Gallic leaders. They decided on a coordinated uprising across all of Gaul. This conspiracy coalesced around one man who was elected to lead the uprising, named Vercingetorix. Now we return to the scene of the battle. Vercingetorix outnumbered Caesar by about a third, and is sitting in a great defensive position. He has reinforcements on the way, but he doesn't know how many are coming or when they will get there. His men are well fed for the moment, but they seem intimidated by Rome's infantry, so he waits. Caesar closes in, and quickly gets to work besieging Alesia. This is already a little unorthodox. Caesar has the numerically inferior force, and is deep in enemy territory with shaky supply lines. Plus, being enemy territory, a Gallic army could be just over any horizon. Caesar was putting himself in a terribly vulnerable position, and he knew it. He begins to construct a set of inward-facing walls that ran an amazing 18 kilometers, circumventing the entire fort and hillside, cutting off any potential escape.
Yeah, that's a good start.
They would have had to clear entire sections of forest just to construct it. These were not
Yeah, imagine all the work and effort, like, because it's different nowadays because there's so much society that's already built, but it's just a bunch of wilderness and like pastures and forest, and you have to use manual labor and just saws. Like, there's no power equipment. Just such a crazy, raw, callous time.
Just some thrown together fortifications either. These walls were 2 stories tall, with ladders and raised platforms for patrols. Then, Caesar turned around and did the exact same thing again, this time facing the other direction. Leaving a wide enough gap to contain his entire army, he constructed another set of walls facing
When we say walls, are they like planks? Or are they like trees?
outward. He managed to get all of this done in a matter of weeks. Naturally, as you would expect, Vercingetorix attempted to slow down this process by sending out raiding parties to attack the workers, but they were easily repulsed by the Roman infantry. Do you see what Caesar did and why he did it? This is where his genius begins to show. Vercingetorix put him in an impossible situation, where he either assaulted a well-defended position against superior numbers, or waited to be caught between two armies with even more superior numbers, or he could have retreated. Caesar created a fourth option. He made his own fort. He stole Vercingetorix's tactical advantage right out from under him. Now, if Vercingetorix wanted out, he was going to have to be the one assaulting Caesar's well-defended position. When Vercingetorix's reinforcements finally arrived, the numbers were huge. If you count the combined Gallic armies, they outnumbered the Romans at something approaching 3-1.
Well, how did they lose then?
On the very first day, the Gallic armies advanced. They placed their massive numbers of cavalry in front, shielding and concealing lines of archers behind them. The Gauls always had excellent cavalry, superior to Roman cavalry in every way, so this was a pretty aggressive stance. Luckily for Caesar, he had been collecting cavalry from all across Gaul for many years now, and he had just received some elite mounted auxiliaries from Germania. He sent them out to meet the enemy advance. Intense cavalry on cavalry fighting took place all day. Whenever the Romans thought they were gaining the upper hand, the Gallic cavalry would pull back into the range of their archers, and the Romans would get surprised by a nasty volley of arrows. At this time, Vercingetorix's forces pushed up and prepared for an attack on the interior wall. They never found the opportunity. Caesar's elite German cavalry regrouped on the hillside and charged downhill into the enemy, finally driving them into a full-fledged retreat. This time, the Romans were able to reach the lines of Gallic archers, who were easily killed. Somehow, outnumbered and outmatched, the Romans were able to hold the Gallic cavalry off, and all sides retired for the evening. The second day passed uneventfully, but that night a focused surprise attack was launched from both directions at one specific point on the Roman defensive line. A young man named Mark Antony
Mark Antony? He's out there?
heroically commanded this section of the line, and in Caesar's eyes, his leadership single-handedly saved the day. Additional troops were called over from the far side of the wall, and the Romans were barely able to hang on for the night. Caesar knew talent when he saw it, and for the rest of his life, Antony would be his right-hand man. On the third day, the Gauls planned for an all-out assault. They began by taking some nearby high ground outside of the enclosure that was being lightly defended by some Roman infantry. The Gallic relief army then launched an offensive along the entire Roman defensive line. The thrust of this attack was a group commanded by Vercingetorix's cousin, who took his men up the newly liberated hillside and charged down it, attacking a weak point in the Roman wall. The small Roman army was stretched thinner and thinner, trying to defend the entire length of the wall at once. Caesar took personal command of his men in reserve, micromanaging groups of 500 men, having them reinforce sections of the wall just as they were about to fall to the enemy. Finally, Vercingetorix realized what was happening and got his act together. He threw every man he had at one point along the thin Roman line, attempting to break through. The Gauls were doing pretty much exactly what they should have been doing. Spread the Romans thin to maximize their numerical weakness, and then breach the walls to nullify the defenses. Caesar saw what was happening, and threw every man he had in reserve at this section of the wall. Caesar was now fully committed, but Vercingetorix's breakout was thwarted. The besieged Gauls now shifted their tactics, beginning to attack the entire length of the inside wall. Caesar's army was now completely surrounded, fighting in all directions at once. The Roman situation now began to crumble. Vercingetorix's cousin, attacking downhill, successfully breached the Roman wall.
How did the Romans win this?
And Gauls began to pour through the Roman defenses. Caesar personally rode through his lines, stealing any unit he thought could be spared, and threw them towards the breach in the wall. In total, he was able to rally over 6,500 men, who formed a shield wall and held the entire Gallic army in place. Caesar then took personal command of his remaining cavalry, who were not of much use defending the walls, who, amazingly, managed to punch through the Gallic attackers at another section of the wall. The Roman cavalry then turned and charged up behind the Gauls who had breached their walls. The Gauls saw the Roman cavalry charge and panicked, not realizing that the Romans were stretched to capacity and that this was the last card that Caesar had to play. Many Gauls tried to flee, but it was too late. the Roman cavalry encircled the Gauls, killing or capturing most of them.
That's how they win.
Seeing this, the rest of the Gallic relief army retreated. This finally allowed the Roman infantry to turn and focus on Vercingetorix, who then was pushed back into the fort. He surrendered the next day. Now you see what Caesar was able to accomplish when he was put in an impossible tactical situation, and you can get a hint at how his brain worked. He wasn't necessarily obsessed with the fancy formations, or complicated maneuvers, or classic set-piece battles. He had great sub-commanders who could do all of that for him. His thinking was always focused on bigger issues. Where does the enemy have the advantage? How can I mitigate that? Where am I strong? How can I maximize that advantage? How can I make the enemy tired? How can I make sure the enemy has the sun in their eyes? How can I make the enemy fight in the mud?
Intangibles.
How can I make them skip breakfast? His military talent, and you could say his political talent, lied with opportunism. He would take a situation and squeeze every conceivable advantage out of it until there was nothing left. And then, as with the Battle of Alesia, he would roll the dice.
I like that analysis, that adaptability and intangible opportunism really showed in Battle of Alesia. Wow. Not bad, Caesar. Especially how he's out there in the mix. He's not like miles away defending with, you know, a courier. He's actually there. He's actually leading. Interesting with Mark Antony. I didn't know that he was part of this, or even part of, you know, the Gallic War at any point. So that's interesting. Yeah, very fun video by Historia Civilis. We will continue our Caesar series. Make sure you watch the previous video, which goes over the entire end of the Gallic Wars. But guys, thank you guys so much. I'll see you in the next one. Double peace out. Bye-bye.